The morning she left, there was frost on the split-rail fences and a hush over the prairie like the world had turned its face from her. No one spoke her name. No one followed. The town of Stonetree had long learned the art of looking away. She walked past the dry goods store, where Mrs. Bellows watched through the smudged front window with hands dusted in flour. Past the chapel, where Reverend Lyle paused mid-sweep of the porch steps, the bristles stilled in his hand. Her boots left narrow prints in the hard-packed earth of the single road, and the hem of her dress, faded blue and mudded at the corners, whispered against her legs like tired wings. She carried no bag, no shawl, no keepsake. Only the slow, secret ache of new life beneath her ribs. They said she had brought it on herself, that she should have known better, that no decent woman would run with a drifter who smelled of horses and gunpowder. The man was long gone, vanished like smoke after a pistol crack, and when her belly began to round, the silence around her grew heavy as wet wool. Her name was Mara Lanton. Daughter of a man who drank himself blind and a mother who died in the cold of '74. She worked at the boarding house since age 14, scouring tin pans and wiping candle wax from windowsills. She spoke little. Listened much. Folks called her ghostly, as though grief had hollowed her to bone and air. On the day she left, she turned once at the crest of the hill above town. No one waved. The sun caught in her eyes and she blinked slow, then faced the horizon. Westward, where the land folded into distant ridges and the wind blew like it had stories to tell. That night the sky bruised deep with storm. Thunder crawled low, sullen and bitter, and the lanterns in town guttered against the glass. In the boarding house, Mrs. Healy muttered that it wasn't right to wander in such weather. In the saloon, a man named Krenner shook his head and said she'd not last the week. Reverend Lyle prayed aloud in an empty pew, voice hoarse with something more than piety, but none went after her, and Mara Lanton vanished into the world. Weeks passed, then months. Letters came, but not from her. A peddler once claimed he saw a girl matching her description in Gallows Pass, working at a tannery, her hands raw and red. Another swore she was seen at a rail camp, belly full, face streaked with ash. But nothing certain. No one knew if she had the child. No one asked. Life in Stonetree carried on in the slow, grudging way of towns built on hard soil and harder hearts. But every now and then, someone would glance west when the sun set gold over the wheat fields, and wonder what became of the quiet girl who left with nothing but the weight of a secret. They did not expect her to return. Certainly not 5 years later, and not the way she did, riding in on a weather-beaten mare, wearing a coat too large and boots too worn, a boy of about 4 nestled against her back, and a look in her eyes like she had walked through more than wilderness. She did not go first to the chapel, nor the boarding house. She tied her horse outside the old butcher's shop, the one that'd been shuttered since the owner drank lye by mistake. And there she stood for a long time, letting the dust settle around her, the child watching the town with wide, owl-dark eyes. When folks finally gathered, drawn by the quiet tension in the air, Mara said little. She gave no names. Answered no questions, but the way she stood told of fires survived. The way the boy clung to her leg told of nights she'd carried him through storm. And the way no one dared ask where she'd been, that said the most. What she carried back was not just a child. It was something heavier, something darker, a story she would tell only once, and only when she was sure the wind had stopped listening. The child was quiet, and his quietness unnerved them. He didn't cry, didn't fidget, just held to her leg like he belonged nowhere else. His coat was patched from many hands, too short in the sleeves, with threadbare cuffs that revealed thin wrists scarred faintly from briars or something worse. His eyes were the color of Black River stones, and he looked at folks like he already knew what they would do before they did it. Mara took a room above the old livery stable, offered by Eli Rourke, who owned the horses and never asked a question in his life. He handed her the key like he was giving her something he hadn't known he'd saved. She nodded once in thanks, the child on her hip, and climbed the stairs without a backward glance. For a while, the town held its breath. Some thought she'd just pass through. Others waited for the moment she'd crack, spill her tale into the dirt like the wide-eyed sinner they imagined she'd become. But weeks passed, then the first frost came, and she remained. She worked where work could be had, mending fence wire, plucking hens for the widow Mearns, even tending to the dying mule behind Jasper Green's smithy. The child followed her like a second shadow, never more than a few paces behind, never complaining. When she labored, he played with twine or watched bugs move through dust. Sometimes he drew circles in the earth and whispered to them. No one knew his name. They didn't dare ask. It was at the schoolhouse where things began to crack, subtle as wind through a shutter. Miss Halloran, the teacher, young and sharp-eyed, offered kindly at first. Perhaps the boy could join the morning lessons, learn his letters, mix with the other children. Myra's reply was calm and low. He knows what he needs. Miss Halloran persisted, later stopping her one morning with a paper in hand and a hopeful smile. Mara paused only long enough to look at the paper, not read it, and said, "There's learning and there's remembering. He's not ready to forget." That same afternoon, the boy stared down a dog twice his size behind the meat shop. The dog backed away, tail down. Rumors grew, as they will in places where time is slow and hearts quicker to fear than to understand. Some said the boy was half feral, raised in the brush like an animal. Others whispered he didn't speak because of something he saw, something too terrible to name. There were murmurs of violence, of strange folk beyond the Raveland Range, of camps where men came and went and left only smoke behind. Mara said nothing, but she walked the edges of the town every evening, the boy's hand in hers. Past the creek where willows bent like old women, past the ruins of an old sod house no one had lived in for a decade. She always carried a small knife at her hip and moved with the steadiness of someone who knew what it meant to be watched. It wasn't until the night of the fire that they began to understand she hadn't returned for mercy or welcome. Old Man Tibbard's barn caught around midnight. Flames tore up through the rafters, and the smell of burning hay choked the town awake. Folks ran with buckets, yelling, panicked, barefoot in the dirt. Mara was already there. She'd seen the smoke before anyone else. Had the boy wrapped in a blanket beside the trough, soot smudged across his cheek like war paint. She moved through the blaze with purpose, not flinching when a beam fell inches from her shoulder. She pulled out Tibbard's mule and one of the younger cows before the roof collapsed. When it was done, when the embers had died to dull glow and the air filled with ash and coughing, Tibbard asked her how she'd known. "Fire starts quiet," she said. "So does hate." And she looked at a corner of the barn that hadn't caught, the one with the broken latch and strange marks in the dirt. Someone had been there, someone who wanted ruin. No one asked what she meant. But a boy named Milo, who had once thrown a stone at the child and called him witch's brat, left town the next morning with his mother and didn't say goodbye. Later, Reverend Lyle visited her room. He brought with him a Bible not to preach but to offer. She did not take it. He asked, in a voice bare as winter bone, if she had found peace out there. "I found what I needed to survive," she said. "Peace is a thing for graves." He looked at the boy, curled by the window asleep, a bundle of limbs and silence. The wind tapped against the pane like it, too, wanted to listen. "Does he speak?" the Reverend asked. Mara met his gaze. "He listens." And that, she said, was more than most. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and soundless. The kind that covers tracks and buries what's been done. Inside, something darker was waiting to be spoken, something that could not yet be told. Not until the town understood what silence could cost. The first thaw brought blood, not in the way Stonetree was used to, not the slow, accepted blood of lambing or butchering. This was the red trail of a man stumbling into town just past dawn, his arm cradled against his ribs like a broken thing, his face torn with frostbite and fear. He collapsed outside Eli Rourke's stable. By the time Eli hauled him inside, his teeth were chattering so hard it sounded like bone cracking. His name was Thad Brower, and he claimed he'd been riding west of the Bluehorn Gulch when he came upon something wrong. "A fire still warm," he said through split lips. "A camp but no folk left, just a mark in the snow and a dead dog with its eyes gone." No one knew what to make of it. Mara listened from the back wall, the boy beside her still as carved stone. She said nothing while others asked questions. Was it a robbery? A bear? Had he seen anyone nearby? Thad only shook his head. "There were tracks," he said finally. "Bare feet, small, like a child." That quieted the room. Eyes slid toward Mara, then just as quickly away. She rose without speaking and led the boy out into the morning. The snow was softening underfoot, and the wind had lost its bite. She walked past the blacksmiths, past the rusting water tower, out toward the hills where the prairie grasses had begun to push up green shoots through the melt. She didn't return until dusk. That night, someone scrawled a word in ash on her door. It was crude, uneven, cowardice hidden in haste. She cleaned it off before the boy woke and went about her day without mention. But the town had turned a corner. People began to cross the street when she came near. The widow Mearns stopped asking her to pluck hens. Even Eli, who'd once tipped his hat, now nodded without meeting her eyes. Only one person spoke to her plainly, Helene Forsyth, who ran the apothecary and had once buried 3 sons and a husband in the space of 2 winters. Helene watched her one afternoon from behind the counter as Mara bought salt and bandage cloth. "He's not like them, is he?" Helene asked. Mara wrapped the cloth slow and precise. "No." "Nor you anymore." Mara's hand stilled. "I wasn't even then." Helene looked at the boy, who was turning a glass jar in his hands, watching the sunlight bend through it. "I know what it is to carry something no one sees," she said. "But grief doesn't stay buried just because we want it quiet." Mara met her eyes then. "It's not grief I carry, it's a warning." That was the day the dreams began. Not for Mara nor the boy, but for the town. People started waking to strange sounds. Crying that wasn't theirs, the creak of doors that hadn't moved. Mrs. Bellows swore she found muddy prints on her bedroom floor, too small to be her husband's boots, too wide for any child still alive. Krenner of the saloon woke with a fever, muttering in a language none recognized. And always, always, there was the sense of something watching. The Reverend said it was guilt, said Mara's return had stirred what was buried. He preached louder longer, but fewer came. The worst was the Tanner child, a girl of 7, bright-eyed, who stopped speaking one night, just stopped. She sat in a chair by the window and wouldn't eat. Wouldn't blink when her mother sobbed beside her. Mara came without being asked. She walked into the Tanner house in the low light of morning, knelt before the girl, and whispered something no one heard. Then she placed her hand on the girl's forehead. The girl slept for 2 days after that. When she woke, she said only one thing: "He told me not to go in the river." No one knew what it meant. Mara did. That evening, she packed a satchel and took the boy with her toward the edge of the riverbed that curled just beyond the town's reach. There, she dug something from the earth beneath an old sycamore root, a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a folded piece of hide, marked with lines and symbols that didn't belong to this place. She burned it before dawn. When she returned, the boy's eyes were brighter. He spoke a word at last, just one, but it bent the silence. "Mama." The town didn't hear it, but something else did, and it was no longer far. Spring bloomed crooked that year. The buds came early, but the winds stayed bitter, and the rain fell hard enough to carve gullies in the high road. Crops faltered. Calves were born sickly. Bees vanished from hives left untouched. People blamed the weather, the soil, the devil. But under breath, in barns and back rooms, they began to say Mara's name with unease. The child now walked a step ahead of her, not behind. He'd grown taller, his steps more sure, and his gaze fixed on things others couldn't see. Once, he stopped in the middle of the street and reached toward the air, as if trying to grasp something that shimmered just out of reach. When a cart nearly struck him, he did not flinch. The driver swore he saw a shape move between them, a flicker of smoke, or light, or something colder. Afterward, Mara held the boy's face in her hands and whispered into his ear with a tremor in her voice, the only time her composure slipped. They spoke more now, but never in full sentences. Their language was sparse, full of gesture and glances, like old wolves communicating over snow. The boy called her Ma, sometimes just M, and she called him nothing aloud. But when she looked at him, it was with a tenderness tempered by fear. Something was changing. The dreams intensified. People began to leave town. First were the Eckards, then Jasper Green and his mute brother, then 3 families from the south side who packed their wagons before sunrise and did not say goodbye. Their leaving felt like a tearing, not a choice but an instinct, like animals before a storm. Then came the night of the figures. Helene Forsyth saw them first, standing at the edge of the churchyard. Tall, still shapes wrapped in gray, like cloaks stitched from ash and shadow. No eyes, no faces, just presence. When she lit a lantern and stepped outside, they were gone, but the ground was wet with footprints, not deep enough for boots. They smelled of rain and burnt cedar. Reverend Lyle confronted Mara the next day. He found her sitting behind the old post house, the boy drawing symbols in the dirt with a stick, circling and erasing again and again. "This is a God-fearing town," the Reverend said, voice shaking. "Whatever followed you here, whatever you've let root in this soil, it has to end." Mara looked up slowly. "It began here," she said, "long before I left." He recoiled as if struck. "You blame us." "I blame silence." There was a pause, long enough for the wind to twist between them like a thread pulled taut. "The boy," he said. "What is he?" She looked to where her son sat, still tracing circles, head tilted. "He's the one who remembered," she said, "when no one else would." The Reverend left without another word. That night, the wind came howling off the hills with a voice in it. Not language, but feeling, raw, guttural grief. Doors slammed without touch. Windows shattered from pressure alone. Chickens died in their coops, their necks unbroken. And somewhere in that storm the boy laughed, not in malice, not in joy, but in recognition. Like a child seeing a face he once knew, long ago, in a place too cold to name. Mara did not sleep. She lit 3 candles in her room and sat between them with her back to the wall and her eyes never leaving the darkened window. At dawn, she stood in the town square. She waited until the townsfolk gathered, drawn by dread or duty or something stranger. "I won't stay past the new moon," she said, "but before I go, you will listen." Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else crossed themselves. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead. She simply said, "You sent me into the world with nothing but a child inside me and silence on your lips. You buried what you feared instead of naming it. But the earth doesn't forget." She paused, eyes scanning the faces, those who had judged her, who had turned away, who now shivered not from cold but from truth. "What came with me didn't come for revenge," she said. "It came to remind." No one dared ask what. No one dared speak her name. Behind her, the boy looked up at the rising sun and smiled like it was the first true warmth he'd ever felt. The final days moved like breath in cold glass, visible, fleeting, sharp. Each dawn came dimmer. Clouds thickened, heavy with more than weather. Even the animals seemed to sense the pause between heartbeats stretching too long. Crows lined the fence rails in threes and didn't fly when people passed. Dogs whined without cause. And in the woods beyond the Tanner place, something dug its way out of the earth. Mara saw the signs first. A circle of pine needles, blackened though no fire had touched them. Bones placed in patterns only seen from above. A horse found tied to a tree, eyes wide open but dead from no wound. The land remembered, and it had started to answer. On the eve of the new moon, Mara walked with her son into the hills beyond the river bend, where old trees grew bent as if hiding something beneath them. She carried no lantern. The boy led the way. They reached a grove surrounded by stones, their surfaces carved faintly with lines worn smooth by weather. Not words, not quite, more like impressions, echoes in bark and granite, old as the wind. There the boy knelt and placed his palms to the earth. The ground did not shake, no light flared, but a stillness came over the land so complete that even the trees held their breath. He whispered, "A name, perhaps." Or a memory too large for syllables. Then Mara stepped forward and poured something into the soil from a small leather pouch. It caught the light with a dull gleam, silver dust, maybe bone, maybe ash, and the wind changed. It turned warm like breath on the back of the neck. It circled them, slow, deliberate. Voices rose, not loud, not human. One voice was a woman, gasping for air. Another a child, not crying but calling for something already gone. Then a man whispering a prayer in a language no one had spoken for 200 years. The boy stood and the grove quieted. He turned to Mara. "It's time," he said. His voice was soft and older than it should have been. She looked into his face and did not cry. She only nodded. They returned to town under a black sky. No stars, no moon, just darkness, thick as sorrow, folding over rooftops and porches and chimneys like a shawl drawn tight. In the center of Stonetree, a fire had been lit, not by matches or oil. It had come up through the cracks in the street. a narrow line of flame, steady and controlled, stretching from the edge of the stable to the church doors. Mara stepped over it. The boy followed. People emerged from their homes, drawn by some pull stronger than fear. She stood before them as if she belonged there, not as a supplicant, not as a warning, but as a witness. "You felt it," she said, "in your sleep. In the quiet between breaths, the weight you tried to forget." They did not speak, but their eyes held her. "You buried something once, not just me, not just the truth of what was done." Her gaze swept them like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. "You buried the children." A gasp stifled, a name swallowed. "In 1872, she said, "the fever didn't take them all, some were left, unwell, strange. And you, afraid of what they might become, chose fire." She turned to the chapel, where the reverend stood pale as parchment, lips parted. "They burned in the root cellar beneath this town," she said. "And the land never forgave you." The fire crackled at her back. "You thought the wind would carry it away, that no one would remember, but grief doesn't vanish, it waits." The boy stepped forward, he looked at the gathered faces, and smiled, not cruelly. Just as one who remembers every name, every scream, every silence. Then he lifted his hand, and the fire obeyed. The fire did not consume. It didn't rage, didn't leap skyward with chaos. It moved with the patience of grief long held. A single line branching outward from the boy's raised hand, tracing the outlines of buildings, curling around doorframes, licking gently at porch steps and shutters. It did not scorch. It revealed. Walls blackened, then cleared. And on them shapes began to show, shadows from another time etched in smoke and ash. Small hands pressed against glass, faces half-turned, eyes wide not with malice but with want, to be seen, to be remembered. The townsfolk stood frozen, pinned beneath the weight of revelation. Some wept without sound, some turned away, but most simply watched as if unable to blink. From within the chapel came a low creak. The trapdoor beneath the pulpit, untouched for decades, opened on its own. The reverend stepped back, lips moving soundlessly. And then came the scent, burnt hair, old wax, earth packed tight over innocence. Mara walked to the edge of the firelight. "This isn't punishment," she said. "This is the reckoning silence always births." The boy stood beside her, his hand lowered now, fingers curled. He looked small again, fragile. But the stillness around him held a power deeper than fury, the kind forged by memory, by the long work of carrying what others cast off. Then, from the crowd, a woman stepped forward, Helene Forsyth. She moved slowly past the fire's edge, into the warmth it gave. She knelt before the boy and laid a small carved figure at his feet, something whittled from cedar, worn smooth. One of the lost, one of hers. "I remember," she whispered. And with that the fire withdrew. It retreated into the cracks it had come from. The markings on the walls faded like mist at morning. The wind softened, and the boy sat, folding his legs beneath him, his head resting lightly on Mara's side. The town did not cheer. There were no apologies, no great speeches, only stillness, only breath. In the weeks that followed, Mara did not leave as quickly as she'd said. She stayed just long enough to help repair a roof, dig a new well, plant 4 young trees where the church cellar had been. People began to speak to her again, not with false kindness or trembling awe, but with quiet understanding. A nod, a loaf of bread left on her step, a blanket sewn by calloused hands. The boy spoke more. He played by the river, watched bees, followed birds. He laughed, not often, but with lightness when he did. And when he looked at the town, it was with something gentler than forgiveness, something like release. On the morning of the summer solstice, they rode out. No procession followed them, no words marked their parting. But as they crested the hill west of Stonetree, Mara turned once, the boy at her side. She did not wave. The town did not move. But from the porch of the apothecary, Helene lifted a hand and pressed her palm to her chest. It was enough. They disappeared into the horizon where light met dust, and the wind, at last, was quiet. In Stonetree, the dead no longer whispered. And the living remembered how to listen.